Hello there. This is Emily Muse, producer of Education Insights Focus on Behavior and the Behavior Education Connection. We are so glad you're here today. We have a great episode in store, but before we dive in, we do have a favor to ask. We would love your help in spreading the word about our podcast. So if you have enjoyed the content here, please feel free to share our shows and episodes with others who might enjoy them, and to make sure that you are subscribed and liking our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. We can't say enough about how much of a difference that makes in helping us spread the word, and we appreciate your help. So, without any further ado, let's dive into today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field.
Hello and welcome back to the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and today I am joined by Elizabeth Boynton. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hey, Selena.
How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I am good. I'm glad you are here. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. So as you said, my name's Elizabeth Boynton. I'm a BCBA in Stafford County Schools. This is my 7th school year in that role. And I work at a central office and I support the FBA and BIP process in our division and consult with school teams.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here today. And you've done a presentation about this for our VAPSBAN network, and you've been doing a lot of work on this. And so today we're talking about your use of the competing behavior pathway tool. So before we get into what you're doing with it, can you give us a little background on what it is?
Absolutely. So I will apologize in advance to the listeners because this is a visual tool, so I will do my best to explain it. But essentially, the competing behavior pathway is a visual framework for looking at the antecedent, the consequences and function of a behavior, of a target behavior, and that kind of sits in the middle of the pathway. And then from the antecedent, we have an arrow going to the top of the pathway. And at the top is the desired behavior. Like under that antecedent condition, what would we like the student to be doing? So for example, if you give a student an independent math worksheet, ideally the student completes that worksheet independently. And then once they complete that worksheet, what is the reinforcing consequence? So in a typical classroom, we'll say like, you get a good job, maybe a sticker on your paper, depending on your grade level. So yeah. And then the important part for us really is the bottom of the pathway. So we say if under that antecedent condition, the student is not able to engage in that desired behavior, and right now they're engaging in some interfering behavior, instead at the bottom of the pathway, what is the replacement behavior we're looking for? So if we can't reach the top of the pathway, what can the student do instead as a replacement behavior that's still going to gain them access to the function? So there's a lot of arrows happening. So at the bottom of the pathway, the arrow is from antecedent to replacement behavior to function. So really driving home the point that that replacement behavior must serve the same function as the interfering behavior in order to be effective.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of behavior analysts, that should make a lot of sense, right? But for teachers and educators, this may not be as common practice or the way that they think about behavior, which is why I'm guessing you like the visual nature of it.
I do. We find it very useful to explain what's happening in like the FBA and BIP process, especially when it comes to determining that replacement behavior. So one of my roles in Stafford is to lead FBA and BIP training. And every year we're always looking at how effective is it and updating it. And since I started in Stafford, we've used the competing behavior pathway visual when teaching about replacement behaviors to really help our trainees understand and be able to identify a replacement behavior that meets the same function. The idea behind a FERB, a functionally equivalent replacement behavior. So we really focused on the competing behavior pathway in that part of training. And then as we were kind of auditing and looking at our FBAs and BIPs, and our BIPs especially, we were kind of losing some of the function-based part of the BIP. We had some good FBAs, so that middle of the pathway was pretty solid. but the BIPs weren't quite matching function as well. So we really decided to hone in on the competing behavior pathway as a driving visual force. And so now in our training, we're connecting all parts of the BIP to that visual. So we're getting people to really talk through what's happening in a situation. They can identify the replacement behavior. And then we can say, okay, even at the top of the pathway, here's the desired behavior we want to get to. But then thinking about where are we now and what reinforcing consequence do we need? Because if the sticker or the good job was actually reinforcing to the student, they'd already be doing the desired behavior and not the interfering behavior. So it
Right.
leads to a conversation of what else do we need to add on the reinforcing side too.
So how is this being how is this being received in your division?
I think pretty well. We've gotten some good feedback from training participants so far. It seems like when we put up the visual and kind of guide our participants through using it, they're able to come to conclusions without us directly giving them the answer kind of thing. So it's a good problem solving tool. And we're even moving beyond just using it for FBA bits specifically, although that's where we see it the most. But just in conversations with teams as we're consulting, we're using that framework and just drawing it on a piece of paper. And again, talking through it with the team. And we've had teachers who be like, oh, and they are like, oh, the kid could do this instead, or I need to reinforce this instead, or oh, they're making the connections to function a little bit quicker and on their own without as much support from us. We've also basically taken parts of the pathway and put it into our BIP form. So we redid our BIP paperwork form this year, and basically the top of the pathway, that desired behavior and reinforcing consequence, is now like a section in the BIP. It's described the same way as it is in the competing behavior pathway. And we've had good feedback on that form and the way that we've kind of designed it to more match the pathway.
I think anytime you can align paperwork with process, right? Like the paperwork shouldn't be driving the process, but we know that when we have to fill out a piece of paper, that's going to influence how that process works. So anytime you can align that in a way that makes sense for people, I think is going to be helpful for everybody.
And that was really the idea we had, is that the paperwork kind of forced you to think through the process in the way that we would like you to, and we've kind of trained you to, knowing that with just a couple of behavior analysts in our division, we cannot support every single FBA and BIP that's out in the world in our division. So we have to train other people and to bring them back to their school buildings to lead those teams in doing FBAs and BIPs. And so we're really intentional with that paperwork and that process piece.
Absolutely. So what is it that you think is helpful for educators with the competing behavior pathway process?
I think the visual nature of it takes a lot of the words out of it, and the arrows really show the directionality of when this happens, then this happens next, this happens next. Okay, where do we go from here? So when this antecedent happens, how am I prompting the replacement behavior? That's an arrow on the pathway. I think just that visual instead of just talking at people. I mean, it's true for students we work with, so why not for the adults that we work with as
Absolutely.
well? Those like graphic organizers are really helpful.
Well, and I think it helps take some of the emotion out of it too, right? Like it forces you to kind of have this systematic look at things rather than just being like, things are really bad right now, and I'm really upset
Mhm.
about that. Okay, well, why are things bad? Like, let's look through this situation and try to analyze this in a
Mhm.
way that's more systemic than just I'm upset or things aren't going the way I want or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I love that you said it. It really takes the feelings part out of it and lets us be more objective, which is going to help us be much better problem solvers. And I think over time, I've framed things more as that problem solving. Like, you've identified a problem. How can I help you solve that problem? And this is one way we can do it. And then also, now that you are familiar with the competing behavior pathway, you don't need me to help you problem solve the next time. You can use that tool on your own. And that's what we're really hoping happens. And maybe in a couple of years, I'll have better data on if that's actually happening.
Well, I think anytime we plan for generalization, right? Just like we do with our kids, we need to do the same with our adults. And, having this idea that we want to help support educators to be as independent as possible. at the end of the day, it doesn't really do them any good if they have to have Elizabeth come into their classroom every time a student engages in some kind of interfering behavior. What we ideally want is actually Elizabeth doesn't have to come in at all because they've got it under control. They can problem solve through it. Interfering behavior is never going to completely go away, but how we respond to it is up to us as adults. And so having some of those tools and skills to be more successful with that, I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I will run into some people, be like, haven't seen you in a while. We'll be like, that's a good thing. That means you've been able to do it, problem solve through things on your own, without me. So as sad as I am to not see you as often, I'm also very excited about that. So
Yeah, I think that's definitely a measure of success, to be honest. I mean, we love seeing people, obviously, but to not have to be in there all the time, I think is a huge thing. So where do you go next? What are the future plans with this?
okay. Consistency in its use, really. And I think expanding it, we've really focused on the FBA BIP thing, as I said, with the competing behavior pathway, but also putting it out there as just a problem solving tool. So we have this like problem solving worksheet, which is kind of like, here are things to think about when interfering behavior comes, and it guides you through like defining the behavior, taking some baseline data, looking at reinforcers and preference assessments, kind of all the things we as behavior analysts are just going to like jump in and ask and want to know when we start consulting on a case. And so I think adding the competing behavior pathway at the end of that problem solving worksheet as another tool for a team to remind them, hey, you can think through this even before you do a full FBA and BIP too, like to get people to just be thinking about function and how can we proactively teach some replacement behaviors before it's at the level of needing a full behavior intervention plan even. So yeah, just the consistency of its use so it gets spread throughout the division, and then keep going with it.
Absolutely. So when you look at your FBAs and BIPs since you started implementing this, have you started seeing some change in what's being developed?
I don't have an answer to that yet. Come the end of the year, we'll do our like audit process with the Tate tool, and we'll see if we are seeing the growth that we're hoping to see.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar with it, can you just give a brief description of what the Tate is?
Sure. The Tate stands for Technical Adequacy Tool for Evaluation for FBAs and BIPs. So it's like a rubric scoring guide that was developed a few years ago, and they actually had a recent article that had an update to it, I think in 2025. So we use that to kind of like that rubric to score our FBAs and BIPs at the end of every year, or at least a sample of them, just to kind of gauge how we're doing.
Gotcha. Do you find that, I know that's not really the topic of what we're talking about today, but do you find that to be a helpful tool? Like, what do you do with, like, how do you use that information?
Oh yeah. So we use that information to tell us like how is our training going? Like are we training people on the things they need to know in order to write technically adequate FBAs and BIPs? So we'll make adjustments to our training. We'll make adjustments to our FBA and BIP manual. And then also that drove a lot of our form changes too, and a little bit of process stuff. So for example, we now on the FBA form have a section about antecedent conditions where the interfering behavior is least likely to happen. So really looking at those successful parts of the day. And that's not something we had before. When we started using the Tate, it's a section in the Tate. So that kind of got us to add that there.
Gotcha. And so all of that kind of, again, that alignment piece with the competing behavior pathways worksheet, really just to help guide teams to make better decisions about what might be going on, to hopefully put in better interventions for students.
Yeah, we're really hoping to see better interventions linked to function and a little bit simplified. Sometimes we find our BIPs have a long list of antecedent strategies, and some might just be repeats of accommodations the kid has had for years, and the connection between the interfering behavior and the antecedent and the function is getting lost. And so our hope is that through all the changes we made, really driven by the Tate and the competing behavior pathway, that we see some better alignment, and the goal being a well-written BIP that's been thought through, all those pieces is going to be implemented and be effective. And I think that's the next piece for us is, okay, if we get to now we have technically adequate BIPs that are written, now are they actually effective is kind of the next step.
For sure. For sure. Well, I really appreciate the conversation. I think this has been really informative, and I hope our listeners will take a look at the competing behaviors pathway. We can definitely link it in the show notes so that you can access it. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
If listeners want to learn more, I'm sure there's other resources, but the basic SBA to BIP website, they use the competing behavior pathway as their framework too. So if you're looking for additional resources, they have some really good ones.
Great. Well, Elizabeth, as always, thank you for being with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
And to our listeners, we will see you on our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.